he had asked, in plain and careful language for a sturdy wife. Tom Wexford had written the advertisement himself at his kitchen table 3 months back, chewing his pencil over every word, and he had been particular about it. A woman accustomed to hard work, unafraid of a milking stool or a wash pot, no interest in fashion or fuss, a widower rancher near Rosebud needing a practical helpmeet, not ornamentation. He had buried one wife already to a winter fever that a sturdier constitution might have weathered, and he was not about to court trouble twice by inviting some delicate creature onto a working cattle ranch. So when the stage pulled into Rosebud and a woman stepped down in a traveling dress of unmistakably fine cut, carrying herself with the kind of poise that belonged on a stage rather than a homestead, Tom Wexford's first thought was that the depot agent had mixed up his parcels. "Mr. Wexford?" Her voice had a trained clarity to it, every syllable placed like a coin on a counter. "I'm Cora Whitby. I believe you're expecting me." "I was expecting a sturdy woman," Tom said, before he could stop himself, and immediately regretted it, because she went very still, and something flickered behind her composed grey eyes that looked less like offence and more like old, practiced hurt. "I can be sturdy," she said, lifting her chin. "Give me the chance to prove it before you send me back." He should have sent her back. He knew it standing right there on the platform. Knew it every day for the first 2 weeks she was on his ranch, because Cora Whitby did not know one end of a milking cow from the other. Scorched the first 3 suppers she attempted, and once set a wash pot to boiling with her good gloves still floating in it. She was, by any measure Tom had specified in his letter, precisely the wrong woman for the job. She was also, he began to notice despite himself, the quickest study he had ever met. She watched his housekeeper's few remaining instructions once and never made the same mistake twice. She took a dozen small burns and blisters without complaint, wrapped them herself, and went back out to try again the next morning with a stubbornness that had nothing delicate about it at all. "You're not what I asked for," he told her one evening, more bewildered than accusing, watching her attempt to mend a fence rail with more determination than skill, 3 bent nails already discarded in the grass beside her. "No," Cora agreed, not looking up from her work, driving a 4th nail in crooked and deciding, with visible stubbornness, that crooked would simply have to hold. "I don't imagine I am. But I've noticed you haven't sent me back yet, Mr. Wexford, for all your particular requirements. Haven't decided if that's poor judgment on my part or something else," he admitted, and she laughed, surprised into it, a real laugh instead of the careful, trained one she'd arrived with. "Where'd a woman like you learn to talk the way you talk, and dress the way you arrived dressed, if not off a ranch?" She hesitated long enough that he knew he'd struck something tender. "I was an actress, Mr. Wexford, on the stage in the city. I played leading ladies in 3 different theaters before I came west. An actress." He said the word like it explained everything and nothing at once. "And what's an actress doing answering an advertisement for a rancher's wife?" "Running," Cora said simply, and something in the plainness of the word, after all her trained diction, told him it was the truest thing she'd said since she stepped off the stage. "I'd rather not say from what, if it's all the same to you. I only ask that you let me stay long enough to earn my keep honestly, and if I can't manage sturdy, I'll go without complaint." Tom Wexford had lost a wife to a fever no amount of sturdiness could have prevented, and he had spent 2 years since telling himself that practicality was the only sensible cure for grief. But watching Cora Whitby stubbornly hammer a nail crooked into a fence rail rather than admit defeat, he found himself less interested in what she'd advertised herself against and more curious about the woman actually standing in his yard. She grew into the work, slow and imperfect, but steady, over the weeks that followed. She learned to bake bread that didn't scorch, learned the rhythm of the milking, learned to read weather the way any rancher's wife needed to. The hired hands, who had watched her early failures with poorly hidden amusement, came around to a grudging respect when she talked one of them through a snake bite with a steadiness that surprised everyone, including herself. And when she organized a harvest supper that had half the county laughing at her stories by the fire, even the most skeptical of Tom's neighbors admitted the rancher might have stumbled into something better than sturdy. In the evenings, when the chores were done, she showed him something no advertisement could have specified, She read aloud from the one battered book of plays she'd carried west, doing all the voices, and Tom found himself, for the first time since his wife's death, laughing out loud in his own kitchen. She had a gift he came to see, not just for performance, but for making a room feel less empty than it had been a moment before she walked into it. And he began to understand that the quiet he'd mistaken for peace these 2 years since his wife died had, in truth, simply been loneliness wearing a patient face. Why the stage in the first place? He asked her once, when the fire had burned low and she'd set the playbook aside. Was it a living or something you loved? Both, once, Cora said, more thoughtful than he'd heard her yet. I loved it before it became a cage. There's a particular kind of trap, Mr. Wexford, in being valued only for the person you can pretend to be on a stage, and never for the plain, unglamorous one underneath it. I came west, in part, hoping to find out if anyone could want that second woman at all. I believe I'm finding out I do, Tom said, quiet, and did not look away when she glanced up, startled, at the admission. You didn't want a woman who could do that, Cora pointed out once, catching him grinning helplessly through her rendition of a foolish count. No, Tom admitted. I didn't know to ask for it. It was 3 months into her stay, on a warm afternoon with the cattle drowsing in the shade and Cora up to her elbows in a washtub, that trouble finally caught up with her, exactly as she had always seemed to expect it might. A fine black carriage rolled into the Wexford yard, entirely out of place among the dust and fence posts, and a man stepped down from it in a city coat too warm for the season, his mustache waxed to points. His manner the particular oiled confidence of a man accustomed to getting precisely what he came for. Celeste, he said, and Cora's whole body went rigid at the sound of a name Tom had never once heard her called. I told you running west wouldn't put you far enough away. Garrick. Cora set down her washing, slow and deliberate, and Tom saw her chin come up the exact way it had the day she stepped off the stage. I owe you nothing. I told you that before I left. You owe me a contract, my dear, and considerable debts against it, costumes, coaching, the theatre's investment in making you into someone worth watching. I don't intend to lose that investment to some dirt farmer in the middle of nowhere. Garrick Vane's smile did not reach eyes that were already sliding over the ranch, over Tom, sizing them both up and dismissing them both in the same glance. You'll come back with me now and we'll say no more about the inconvenience. She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go, Tom said, stepping between them before he'd fully decided to, his voice quiet in the particular way that meant a great deal more than shouting would have. And she doesn't owe a debt for being owned, Mr. Vane, however you've dressed it up in a contract. A person isn't a costume to be paid off. This isn't your affair, rancher. She's under my roof and she's under my protection, so I'd say it's entirely my affair. Tom did not raise his voice, did not reach for the rifle standing just inside the door, though every instinct told him to. He simply stood, immovable as a fence post, between Garrick Vane and the woman he'd come to claim. You're welcome to say your piece and go, but you'll not lay a hand on her, and you'll not speak of her like property while you're standing on my land. Cora stepped up beside him then, not behind him, her spine straight as a rifle barrel, the stage poise she'd carried onto that platform 3 months ago returning to her all at once, tempered now by everything sturdier she'd learned since. I left because you made my life a debt I could never finish paying, Garrick, no matter how many houses I filled for you. I'm not coming back to be owned by a ledger. If you've truly come all this way to collect something, collect the truth. I was never for sale, and I never will be. You'll regret this, Celeste, Garrick said, his oiled confidence cracking at last into something meaner. There's no theatre west of the Mississippi that will touch you once word gets round you broke a contract. You'll have thrown away everything you built for a dirt farm and a man who'll tire of you inside a year. Then I'll have a dirt farm and a man who stood in front of me when it mattered, Cora said, which is more than a contract ever gave me, Garrick, in all the years I signed my name to yours. She did not raise her voice. She had spent a lifetime learning to be heard without shouting, and every ounce of that training served her now. Go home. Tell whoever asks that Celeste Duval retired. It will even be true. Garrick Vane looked between the two of them, the rancher who would not move and the woman who would not bend, and found, for the first time in the telling of his own story, an audience that refused entirely to play the part he'd assigned them. He straightened his coat, muttered something about the foolishness of country people, and climbed back into his carriage without another word, driving off in a cloud of dust that Cora watched until it vanished entirely from the road to Rosebud. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, once the yard had gone still again. "I should have told you before now, about the depths about him. You had every right to send me packing the day I stepped off that stage, and instead you just stood there and defended me. I asked for a sturdy wife," Tom said. And for the first time she heard something warm underneath the old gruffness, something that had been building unnoticed for 3 months of scorched suppers and crooked fence nails and evenings full of a stranger's laughter finally coming easy in his own kitchen. "Took me a while to work out that sturdy wasn't ever about milking cows, Cora. It's about a person who keeps standing back up. You've done that every single day since you got here. Is that a proposal, Mr. Wexford, or an employment review?" "Both, if you'll have it." He held out his hand, work-roughened and entirely sincere. "I don't need an actress and I don't need a milkmaid. I believe I just need you, plain as that." Cora Whitby, who had spent a lifetime playing other women's stories on other people's stages, looked at the rancher who had just stood between her and the last chain of her old life and refused to let it close around her again, and found, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she wanted nothing more than to simply be herself, in her own true story, for good. "Then you have me," she said, and took his hand and meant every word of it exactly as it was, no performance required. They were married that autumn under the cottonwoods behind the house, the hired hands turned out in their best shirts and the neighbors who'd once whispered about the actress bride now toasting her by name, her true name, spoken plain and proud. Cora never went back to a stage, though she kept the battered book of plays on the parlor shelf and read from it most winter evenings, doing all the voices, while Tom Wexford sat by the fire and laughed the easy laugh of a man who had asked for one thing and been given, instead, everything he hadn't known to want.